The desert of Sinai is a place where silence has a physical weight. For the Israelites, the sand beneath their feet was a constant reminder of their displacement. They were a people defined by what they were not. They were no longer slaves of Pharaoh. Yet they were not yet a nation of God. They lived in a terrifying vacuum, and in between, where the absence of Egyptian whips left a hollow ache of uncertainty. If you feel that same sense of being adrift in your own life, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. The journey to the mountain had been a harrowing sequence of miracles and terror. They had watched the Nile turn to blood and felt the darkness of Egypt that could be touched. They had walked through the towering walls of the Red Sea, hearing the roar of the water held back by an invisible hand. Yet, as they camped at the foot of the jagged granite peaks, their internal compasses were still spinning. Their hearts were still synchronized to the rhythm of the overseer's bell, and the vastness of the wilderness felt more like a grave than a playground of freedom. Moses, a man whose own speech felt as heavy and jagged as the mountain rocks, looked back at the million shivering souls. He saw the faces of men who had spent their lives making bricks without straw and women who had hidden their infants from Egyptian soldiers. They were free, yes, but they were chaotic. Without a law, they were simply refugees waiting for the desert to reclaim them. As the third month of their journey arrived, the atmosphere at Sinai shifted. A thick cloud descended upon the peak. This wasn't a weather event. It was a collision between the infinite and the finite. The mountain was smoking like a furnace because the Lord descended on it in fire. The earth began to groan, and a celestial trumpet grew louder and louder, vibrating in the very marrow of their bones. Please note that while this video and its imagery are created by AI to enhance your visual experience, the story and the biblical historical accuracy remain true. God called Moses to the summit, and as he climbed into the thick darkness, the people stood at a distance, paralyzed. They begged Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." They were witnessing the birth of a covenant, a marriage between a holy Creator and a broken people. Stay with us until the end of this journey, because the final chapter reveals the ancient secret to overcoming the modern struggle. If this story of God reaching down to a lost people resonates with your heart, kindly hit the like button. Point 1. The architecture of true liberty. The actual biblical narrative in Exodus 20 begins not with a list of rules, but with a reminder of relationship. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." Only after establishing his identity as their liberator does God begin to carve the boundaries. As Moses ascended, the people below felt the familiar itch of anxiety. In Egypt, they knew exactly what to do because they were told what to do. Now, the silence of God felt like abandonment. We often think of rules as a cage, but as the first commandment were revealed, God was actually building a fortress. He was defining the sacred space where their relationship could thrive. The Israelites were terrified of the thunder, yet they desperately needed the structure it brought. They were learning that a river without banks is just a swamp. It is the boundaries that give the water its power and direction. These laws were designed to protect the vulnerable, honor the family through the Sabbath, and preserve the dignity of the human soul. Life Application 1. Finding safety in sovereignty. In our modern world, we are told that total freedom means having no restrictions, the ability to do anything, at any time, with anyone. However, we often find that this lack of boundaries leads to a profound sense of lostness. Just as the Israelites needed the "thou shalt nots" to define their new identity, we must realize that divine boundaries are not meant to ground us, but to protect us. When we accept that there is a moral North Star, we are freed from the exhausting task of having to invent our own truth every single morning. We would love for you to drop a comment below, sharing a time when a boundary in your life actually felt like a blessing. This realization acts as a sedative for the modern soul. When we stop fighting the fences God has placed around our lives, we discover that those fences weren't built to keep us in, but to keep the predators out. True liberation isn't found in the absence of law, but in the presence of the right lawgiver. By leaning into the structure of the Ten Commandments, we find a relief that the world cannot offer. The relief of knowing exactly where we stand and whose we are. It is the safety of knowing that the architect of the universe has already drawn the blueprints for a life that works. Point 2. Choosing presence over portraits. The story takes a dark turn in Exodus 32. Moses had been on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights. To the people at the base, he was as good as dead. The emotional stakes reached a breaking point. They turned to Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." Aaron, pressured by the crowd's need for something they could touch, fashioned a golden calf. They needed a mascot for their fear, a god they could fit in a wagon. It's a heartbreaking irony. While Moses was receiving the blueprint for the tabernacle, the people were busy shrinking God down. They wanted a God that didn't talk back, a God that looked like their past Egypt rather than their future. Moses descended, the 2 stone tablets in his hands, to find a party that looked like a riot. The breaking of the tablets at the foot of the mountain wasn't just a fit of temper, it was a physical manifestation of a broken contract. The sound of the stones shattering echoed the sound of a covenant being torn apart by the very hands it was meant to save. Life application 2. Choosing faith in the fire of delay. Most of our golden calves are built in the waiting rooms of life. When God seems silent or the mountain of our problems is shrouded in clouds, we are tempted to manufacture our own solutions. Choosing faith means resisting the urge to settle for a manageable substitute when the living God is taking his time. The Israelites' failure teaches us that a God we can control is a God that cannot save us. True peace is found in the unseen presence, not the gold-plated shortcut. We must understand that the silence of God is not the absence of God. It is often a testing ground for our devotion. When we rush to fill the silence with our own inventions, we end up dancing around a statue that has ears but cannot hear us. By choosing to wait, by choosing presence over portraits, we develop a spiritual stamina that can survive the wilderness. The strength to say, "I will wait for the real thing," is the hallmark of a heart that has moved past superficial religion into a deep, unshakable trust. It is better to be in the dark with God than in the light with an idol. To help us spread these vital truths, please consider subscribing to our community. Point 3. The radiance of a transformed heart. The most transformative moment didn't happen during the first ascent, but the second. In Exodus 34, God calls Moses back. After the failure, after the judgment, and after Moses' desperate intercession, he went back up with 2 new blank stones. This time, the encounter was even more intimate. God passed in front of him, proclaiming his name, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God. Moses didn't just bring back laws this time. He brought back a reflection. When he finally walked down the slopes after another 40 days, he was unaware that his face was literally glowing. He had to wear a veil just to speak to them. He had moved beyond the facts of the law into the relationship of the lawgiver. The 10 Commandments were no longer just a list of chores. They were a mirror of God's character. Moses had been in the presence of the I Am, and he was permanently altered. He didn't just have the rules in his hands. He had the rhythm of heaven in his heart. The stone was no longer a cold burden. It was a warm testament to a God who refuses to give up on a stiff-necked people. Life application 3. From compliance to character. This is the ultimate secret to overcoming the modern struggle of trying to be good. We often treat morality like a checklist, which leads to inevitable burnout. The law was never meant to be a ladder to reach God, but a map to show us we need Him. When we stop trying to white-knuckle our way through the commandments and instead seek the presence of the one who wrote them, our glow changes. We stop asking, "How close to the line can I get?" and start asking, "How close to the light can I get?" Compliance becomes a byproduct of love. If this message has challenged your perspective, we invite you to leave a comment describing how seeking God's presence. This shift from external pressure to internal passion is the only cure for moral exhaustion. When you fall in love with the author, you naturally begin to love the story he is writing for your life. You no longer avoid theft or lies out of fear of punishment, but out of a desire to reflect the integrity of the one who calls you friend. This is the secret to overcoming the decision fatigue of our age. Stop trying to manage your behavior and start pursuing the face of God. His radiance will naturally begin to burn away the shadows of your struggle. True transformation doesn't happen by looking at the stone. It happens by looking at the one who carved it. The synthesis, a nation reborn. The journey from the bricks of Egypt to the stones of Sinai was a journey from identity as utility to identity as family. The 10 Commandments weren't a heavy burden for the Israelites to carry. They were the wings that allowed them to fly straight in a crooked world. Eventually, these words would lead to the construction of the tabernacle, where the ark would sit at the center. For you, the viewer, the story of Sinai is an invitation. Your modern struggle is often just a hunger for the ancient paths. Partner with us by subscribing to help the wisdom of the Word advance.